Okay, today's daf is Shabbat daf Nun Chet. We're going to start right at the very top. Just to refresh your memory, we're in the middle of a Mishnah about what items a woman can walk out into Rishut Harabim wearing or not. And one of the items mentioned is a kavul, not to go out in a kavul to Rishut Harabim. And again, we had this whole issue of what are all these things mentioned in the Mishnah? What's the reality of these cases? The Gemara didn't even exactly understand. And Shmuel suggests that it's talking about kavla da'avda. So we're starting right now with the first line of the page. Ushmuel amar kavla da'avda tnan, which means it was a sign of avdut, okay, that you were a slave, so they would wear something around their necks, which would show that they were a slave, like slaves had a little tag, you walk around at conferences with a tag on your, so they would walk around with tags. We're actually talking on Shabbat. There were a lot of people walking around with their masks, a lot of people in general walking around, and then people with their masks, and no one could identify anybody else. And we were saying, you should have a tag on your mask saying, what your name is so that people know who you are. Especially if you're wearing sunglasses and a mask, you're totally not identifiable. So here, they wanted that, now we're going to learn that there were two types of kavlas, or two types of these, I can't think of the word, but that the Eved would wear around his neck, showing that he was a slave. Okay, first of all, they would sometimes wear on their neck, sometimes on their clothing. And there were two different types. There were ones that, at least we're going to suggest that this is the possibility when we try to come up with an answer to some contradictions, that maybe there's a difference between one that the owner, an emblem, thank you, an emblem that he wears. There could be a difference between one that he himself decides to wear and one that his master wants him to wear. Now, what's the difference? Well, the one that he himself wants to, forget what the difference is. Why would we have two different types? Why would he want to make his own emblem, or why would the master want? So the master wants an emblem for him to always remember, you belong to me and you're subjugated to me. He might want to make his own to go out in public and show people, I belong to someone, so that maybe, especially if you belong to someone of importance, then maybe people would treat him with respect. So there's different types of emblems also. But right now we're going to assume, okay, there was something called the emblem of a slave. So now they say, now, by the way, what kind of slave are we talking about? We're probably talking about a slave, a Canaanite slave. We've talked about it before, but I'll refresh your memory. It's somebody who basically lives in the house of a Jew. He's Canaanite, or not Jewish. And he does a pseudo-conversion. He goes to the mikvah. He gets a, does he go to the mikvah? Forget, no, I think he just gets a brit milah, right? If he goes to the mikvah, then he can become fully Jewish. Now I'm totally forgetting, but he definitely gets a brit milah, and he becomes part of the household. He's obligated in mitzvot, other than, like women, time-bound mitzvot. Okay, that he's not obligated, but he is obligated in other mitzvot. And Shabbat, right? L'man yanuach shorcha, right? And avdecha, right? Avdecha and amatcha are always in the list. You, your sons, your daughters, and your slaves. So they also can't go out with certain things. So anyway, he says this must be a kavla da'avda. So again, the Mishnah says you can't go in Rishut Harabim with this. Now the Gemara says, Shmuel hachi, does Shmuel really say this? V'hamar Shmuel, doesn't Shmuel say, Yotzei ha'eved, he said in a different place, Yotzei ha'eved b'chotam shebetzavaro, aval lo b'chotam shebetzuto. He specifically said that a slave can go out in Rishut Harabim with this emblem around his neck. And the assumption is that the kavla that we were talking about in the Mishnah was around one's neck. He does say that you can't go out, the slave can't go out with a chotam shebetzuto, one on his clothes, but he can go out with the one around his neck. So Shmuel explains our Mishnah as saying a slave can't go out with this, but he said somewhere else that a slave can go out with this. So how do we rectify that? So as I already mentioned, lo kasha, we're going to distinguish between different types of emblems. Ha da'aved le'rabe, ha da'aved iu lenafshe. There's one that his master makes him. Now that, he's petrified of his master. So he's not going to take it off if he's in Rishut Harabim, for sure not. So that's where Shmuel said elsewhere the slave can go out like that. But if he made one for himself, since it's really for his own sake, it could be he might decide to take it off. He might go to an area where he really doesn't want anyone to know he's a slave, and he wants to take it off. So since he made it for his own sake, he might just take it off. There's no fear of his master upon him at that point. So that's how we explain the contradiction in the way Shmuel explained our Mishnah, that he can't go out. That's if he did it for himself, and versus he can go out, and that's if his master did it. But now the Gemara says, wait a minute. In other words, the other statement we said of Shmuel that said, again, this is why it's always helpful to just go back to the sheet, where he said, Yotzei ha'eved b'chotam shebetzavaro, aval lo b'chotam shebetzuto. He can go out with one around its neck, but not on his clothing. So if it's from his master, then what are we going to have to explain? Amai lo, right? The chotam shebetzuto, amai lo. What's the reason then? If it's on his clothing, why can't he go out on Shabbat with it? If the whole issue is his master made it, and for sure he's not going to take it off, then he's not going to take it off if it's around his neck. He's not going to take it off if it's on his clothing. So why does it say there that he can't go out of Rishut Harabim with this emblem that's on his clothing? So here comes the Gemara's answer. Dilma mifsik umirtit umekapele umachet leakat. It might fall off. And if it falls off, he'll be nervous about it. And what will he do? Well, now the issue is that we're worried he's going to take his clothing and he's going to, instead of, okay, now I think it was kind of like a talit. When, some people wear a talit over their heads. So imagine you're wearing it, it's over your head. And if you're wearing it, it's over your head and the rest of it's hanging down. So that's the way people normally walk around with it. But if the emblem fell off, what does he want to do? Well, he's scared that if his master sees him without the emblem on, he'll get very angry at him. So he doesn't want him to notice the place where the emblem is missing. So what does he do? He folds up imagine a talit. It's easier to imagine that, right? And it's in general folded on the shoulder, but he folds it up, piles it up on the shoulder, so the shoulder is totally covered. And that's not a normal way you would wear clothing. That ends up being considered carrying. So that's why if it's on his clothing, we're worried that he might fold up his clothing to hide the missing emblem. And then at least it won't be noticeable. It's still, if the master looked, he would notice that it was missing. But, he'd ask him, why are you covering up and what's going on? But the assumption is, at first glance, he's not going to see an empty spot where the emblem belongs. And therefore, we're worried that might happen. Now, who's to say that folding up a garment like that on your shoulders is a problem? Well, Kidder Rav Yitzchak bar Yosef, like Rav Yitzchak bar Yosef said, to Am Rav Yitzchak bar Yosef, Am Rav Yochanan in a different context, but something similar. By the way, it's not, when they say talit, they don't necessarily mean a talis, like we call a talis. It's a cloak. If somebody goes with a talit that's folded up and on one's shoulders b'Shabbat, chayav chatat. That is asur midoraita. Okay, that's number one. And then we're going to see another place of this. So there he says explicitly, wearing it in that manner is not considered wearing like clothing. Remember, anything you wear like clothing is okay. Anything you don't wear like clothing is going to be a problem. So now, what's the issue? Okay, so someone points out here that we're not worried about him picking up the seal and carrying it. So hold off on that, because first of all, it could be even here, some people think that maybe that's the issue. We're definitely going to see that in another minute or two, okay? So that we are worried also about him picking up the seal. We're going to get to that too. So now, but it seems here the real concern is folding it up and not necessarily that it dropped. Now we're going to continue and see another situation where we're just going to basically prove what we just said, which is that we're sometimes concerned that people might fold up to hide something and that will be forbidden to do on Shabbat. The Chihad Amar le Shmuel le Rav Chinina bar Shila, Shmuel said to Rav Chinina bar Shila, again the same Shmuel by the way, he said, Kulu Rabbanan debei reish galuta lo lifki b'sar b'le chatime levar minach de lo kapte alach debei reish galuta. It is a very strange thing. We'll try to figure out. There's a bunch of different interpretations given here. All the rabbis of the house of the Reish Galuta. Now, first, that's already a strange statement. The Reish Galuta was the exilarch. Remember, he was the head of it was like the Nasi job they had in Israel. That was the Nasi job. Here, by the way, it was always given, I don't know if I mentioned this before, to someone in the house of Beit David. Okay, it was kind of viewed as a type of malchut, a kingdom. So they were kind of like the king of the exile. They had, what does it mean, the rabbis of the house of Reish Galuta? So some people, by the way, don't have this version, and it doesn't say the rabbis of the Reish Galuta, and it doesn't really mean that. We did see that Rav Nachman, for example, who was married to Yalta, who was the daughter of the Reish Galuta, and he was kind of the rabbi that was in charge of the Reish Galuta, and there was always, often there was a rabbi that he would turn to as those were his issues. They usually had a very good relationship, and sometimes it created tension with other rabbis. Some people say it's specifically talking about those rabbis. Some people are saying it's talking about all the rabbis. What's the connection with the Reish Galuta? Well, either the Reish Galuta or maybe the local authorities put a tax on clothing. Now, it could be on all clothing. Could have been on particular clothing that rabbis specifically wore. They wore maybe in a more expensive or I and not all the rabbis have money, but maybe also the rabbis of the Reish Galuta, if we say it's the rabbis of the Reish Galuta, they were known to be the more wealthy type, right? Obviously, the exilarch chose the ones he was in connection with and that lived in that wealthy, same socioeconomic category, and those were his people. So those people had maybe a special cloak that was a little more expensive if they were taxed on that clothing. So they had to wear a stamp on it that showed I paid my taxes on this, okay? It was like sort of a noticeable way that they wore taxes. So now it says they can't go out with the sarbale chatime, with these cloaks that have the stamp on it on Shabbat, other than you, Rav Chinina. Okay, you, Rav Chinina bar Shila, who, by the way, was known to be wealthy, which makes sense why he was so close with the exilarch. You're the only one because lo kapte alei de reish galuta. They're not going to bother you if you don't have the stamp on it. But everybody else has to worry that maybe they'll catch them without the stamp on it, and therefore they can't go out with it on Shabbat, because what will happen? The exact same thing with the slave. If their stamp falls off, or they, for whatever reason, don't have one, they'll put their cloak piled up on their shoulders, so nobody will notice that there's no stamp there. And again, it will end up being carrying on Shabbat. Okay, so that's the whole issue with the carrying. So we started, just to review, just so we keep this daf very organized, because it's a very organized daf, but you can get a little bit lost. So we started off with Shmuel's explanation of the Mishnah. The kvul was this thing that they wore, the emblem they wore around the neck of the slaves. Shmuel says somewhere else you can go out on Shabbat with it. How do we resolve it? Two different types, one that he makes for himself, one that his master makes for him. Gufa. Now we're going to go into this statement that we brought of Shmuel about the Eved. Amar Shmuel. Yotzei Eved b'chotam shebetzavaro, aval lo b'chotam shebeksuto. So now they just quoted, and now they're going to say, Tanya nami hafchi, there's a braita to support this. Yotzei Eved b'chotam shebetzavaro, aval lo b'chotam shebeksuto. So now there's a braita that says exactly what Shmuel said. Now you wonder, why did Shmuel say something that appeared in a braita? Probably he didn't have the braita, so he said it, right? And someone else says, oh, by the way, what Shmuel said is also found in a braita. Okay? Uriminhu. But now we're going to break, and this is going to be our mantra for today. We're going to keep bringing, this is going to keep repeating itself. We're going to keep bringing different braita that seem to say other things. So now there's another braita that says, Lo yotzei ha'eved b'chotam shebetzavaro v'lo b'chotam shebeksuto. Okay, it starts off by saying, not with a chotam in his neck and not with one on his clothing, where the braita and Shmuel both said he can go out with one around his neck, just not on his clothing. So we're going to have to resolve this. But before we resolve it, we're going to read the whole long braita, and then eventually we're going to get to all the sections of this braita to understand them better. This braita is not only talking about issues of Shabbat, but also issues of, is this item susceptible to impurities? Again, for something to be susceptible to impurities, it has to be either a person can be susceptible to impurities, food or drink can be susceptible, or a kli. And for something to be a kli, a utensil, it has to be useful. And we also said useful for a person, not necessarily for an animal, right? It has to have a use. So what does it say about this chotam, this emblem? They are not considered a utensil, okay? It doesn't serve a purpose for the eved. Okay, also not if you have a bell around its neck. He can't go out on Shabbat with a bell that's hanging around his neck, but he can go out with one that's on his clothing. Now those already are makabel tuma. Why? Because for something to be considered a utensil, it could also be jewelry to be considered a utensil, as we saw before, and jewelry is susceptible to impurity. How do we know this? Well, if you remember, where do we learn the laws of impurity from? The battle with the Midyanim, and then it talks about all the different utensils they took from them, and it also talks about the jewelry they took from them. So the jewelry is susceptible to impurity, because there then they had to purify everything that they got from them. So the bell around its neck could be also functioning as jewelry, and therefore it is susceptible to impurity. We're going to go more into detail into all these cases soon. And now we're moving on. If we're already talking about an emblem and a bell, we're now going to talk about not just the slave wears, but also an animal wears. An animal can't go out on Shabbat, not on an emblem, either if it's around its neck or if it's on its clothing. What exactly is its clothing? Again, it could be a blanket, something they put to wrap the animal. The lo bizug shebetzuta v'lo bizug shebetzavara, and not on a bell. The animal can't go out with a bell. We saw this before, right? Not on its clothing or not around its neck. V'zeh v'zeh, now the animal, the emblem of the animal and the zug, ein makablim tuma. Okay, they're not susceptible to impurity. Rashi says, and why would we distinguish here between the eved? Right, the eved, we said the emblem wasn't, but the bell was, because the bell was jewelry. But there's no such thing as jewelry for animals, as Rashi says, ein tachshit lebehema, and therefore it's not susceptible to impurity in either case. Okay, so now, where did we start? Let's just go back because we probably got lost in this Braita. Yotzei ha'eved, let's go back to the beginning of the Braita. B'chotam shebetzaparo, but not b'chotam shebetzuto. I'm sorry, my mistake. That's what the Braita, the first Braita said, and that's what Shmuel said. But this Braita says, right, so you can go out according to that with one around your neck, just not on your clothing. And this one says you can't go out not with one around your neck and not with one on your clothing. So how do we resolve this? Well, the obvious way to resolve it would be the same way we resolved Shmuel's two statements previously, right? Lema, why don't we say, now remember, when you see lema, what do you know? This will get rejected. It's a suggestion that's going to be rejected. Lema, hadavid le rabbe, hadavid yu lenafshe. Why don't we just say the same way we said before? If he made it himself, then we're worried he's going to take it off, and that's where it says in the second Braita it's forbidden. Where we say it's permitted around one's neck is when the master did it for him, and then we're not worried he's going to take it off. But then the Gemara rejects that and says, lo, and I don't know if they reject it to say this isn't a possibility, but they suggest a different possibility. Idi da'avid le rabbe. You could say that both are where his master did it for him. And what would be the difference? And here we get to whoever asked me before, why aren't we worried about it falling, right? Carolyn, you asked me that. Why aren't we worried about it falling? Here it comes. Kam b'shel matechet v'kam b'shel tit. There's a difference whether it's metal or whether it's made of cement or clay or some sort of material like that. If it falls and you come home and you don't have it and your master is going to be very angry with you, right? That's davar makpid alav rabo, ein yotzim bo. Then you can't go out with it. If it's made of matechet and you come home and you don't have it, your master is going to be very unhappy with you. And therefore, if it falls off, you're going to pick it up and you're going to carry it home. And that's why you can't go out with it. So even if your master made it for you, and we're not worried you're going to take it off, but it could fall. And if it falls, remember, these are the two things we said yesterday. When it comes to, let's say, women and what they can go out with, there's either concern maybe it'll fall. There's also concern maybe she'll take it off. Like with her jewelry, she wants to show her friends the jewelry, she'll take it off. So we're not worried you're going to take it off, but we are worried that maybe it'll fall. And if it falls and it's metal, you're going to take it home. Now, if it falls and it's made of teak, it's going to break. And it's not going to be, and it's also it's not worth very much. So your master's not going to be upset if you say, well, it fell off and it broke and I don't have it. Well, he won't be upset with you because what are you going to bring home? Different little pieces, he'll just make a new one. So therefore, they say, so Rabbi Bar Avua said, Davar makpid alav rabo, if he's makpid and he's going to want you, he's going to say, where is this when you come home without it? Ein yotzim bo. Then you can't go out with it on Shabbat. But Davar she'en makpid alav yotzim bo. Okay, and now they're going to further prove this answer. Hachinami mistaber, because remember, we have two possible answers. Either the contradiction between the two Braito could be explained as one he made for himself and one his master made for him. Or it could be explained as one that's made of metal, one that's made of this teat. So now we're going to say, how do we know that if it's made of teat, that it can't be the Braita that said that he can't go out, this new Braita that we brought, Lo yetzeh ha'eved b'chotam shebetzavaro, but lo b'chotam shebeksuto is talking about metal because you might come to take it home. How do we know that for sure that's what it's talking about? Hachinami mistabra, it makes sense. Midekatane zeh v'zeh ein makablim tumah. Now notice what it said about this emblem. It's not susceptible to impurity. Now what does that seem to imply? So if you say it was metal, it makes a lot of sense. Because what is it saying? Hanihu de lo makabli tumah. This emblem of metal is not going to be makabel tumah, is not susceptible to impurity. But if it weren't an emblem, but it were something else, it would be susceptible to impurity. It's just this one isn't because it's an emblem and that's not considered a kli. It's not jewelry. The Eved doesn't even really want to be wearing this, and it's not something, right? It's not something useful. You can't put anything in it. It has no use, so it's not a kli. But if it were metal, something else, like a metal bowl, a metal was used for some other important purpose, then it would be, or even a necklace, then it would be. But if you said it was made of teat, tanan, that's what the Mishnah, the Braita was talking about. Hani hudelo makabli tuma, ha kelim didu makabli tuma, v'hatanya klei avanim, klei glalim, klei atama, ein makablim tuma, lo midivrei Torah, v'lo midivrei sofrim. But actually, that material is not susceptible to impurities because teat is made from the ground. And any kli that's made either from rocks or stone or from dung or from the ground, okay, dirt and things from the ground, which is what the teat is made of, those are not makabel tuma, not from the Torah and not from the rabbis. They're not susceptible to impurity at all. So to say that this emblem that's made of teat is not susceptible to impurity doesn't make any sense, because it wouldn't be susceptible to impurity no matter what it was. And therefore, it makes sense to say that the Braita that talks about susceptibility to impurity must be referring to metal. And again, metal, we're concerned that he might pick it up, and that's the reason why it's forbidden. Okay? And there we've answered our question. Now, though, that we started with this Braita, again, I'm going to remind you, 3 sections to the Braita. So let's just review them. If you look at the sheet, it's the second chart on the sheet that I made. So the first was lo yetzeh eve b'chotam shevet tzavaro v'lo b'chotam shevet suto, and both of them aren't susceptible to impurities that we just explained. Now we have the second line is not also with the bell around its neck, but it could go if the bell, he could walk out if the bell was attached to the clothing. And the bell attached to the clothing or around the neck, zeh v'zeh mekablim tuma. So let's deal with that second line. Okay, so we're starting about 12 lines from the bottom. Amar ma. V'lo b'zug shebet tzavaro, aval yotzeu b'zug shebet suto. Zug shebet tzavaro, amai lo. Why can't you go out with this zug around its neck? Dilma mifsik va'ate latuye. We're worried it might fall, and then you'll pick it up. Well, if that's the case, why do we distinguish? We have to explain. Why are we distinguishing around the neck or on the clothing? Around the clothing should be the same thing. Zug shebet suto nami lichush dilma mifsik va'ate latuye. Theoretically, it could also fall off the clothing, right? A bell, first of all, is kind of heavy, could fall off. So both of these we'd be concerned. So therefore, it doesn't make any sense. So the Gemara answers, it was sewn onto, right, getting back to sewing and all that, it was sewn onto the cloak. When it's around your neck, it's probably on a string or something, and the string could easily open up. But when it's on your clothing, it must mean that it's sewn onto your clothing. Now the Gemara is going to bring a proof, and it's going to be a bit of a problematic proof. You'll see why in a minute. And just like Rav Huna Bered Rav Yoshua said in yesterday's daf. Ta'amar Rav Huna Bered Rav Yoshua, if you remember, there was actually 2 versions of what he said. This is one of the versions. Kol shehu arug lo gazru. Anything that's sewn, the rabbis didn't make a gzera, an ordinance about it. Now this is very nice. If you take this line totally out of context, then what does it mean? Well, if it's sewn on, then the rabbis didn't say it's a problem to go out with it on Shabbat, because all these issues of going out on Shabbat are gzera, right? The rabbis said you can't just in case something happens. It's actually forbidden midoraita. So if you take his line out of context, that anything that's sewn is not makabel tuma. What's the problem? The problem is, if you remember, where did he say that? He was talking about mikvah and chatzitza. He said, oh, if something's sewn on, then it doesn't create a separation between you and the item, because if it's sewn, then the water can get under or the water can get through, and it's not a problem. So it's interesting, they kind of take this line out of context, and Tosfot points it out and says, even though if you look at Tosfot Kedei Rav Huna, he says, even though it had to do nothing with our issue, since he said it there, we're going to say, he also must have, would have said it here. Okay, and they basically borrow that line from there and attach it to here, but it's not exactly the strongest proof because it really wasn't what he was talking about. And if you remember also, there were 2 versions of what he even said in the first one. Okay, Amar Mar. Now we're getting to the last line of the Braita. The last section of the Braita was about the animal. So with the Eved, we had differences between the chotam, you can never go out with, and it's not makabel tuma, whether it's around your neck or on your clothes. The bell, we distinguish between clothing and on your neck, and there we said the concern is it's going to fall, but we're not worried on your clothing because it means it's sewn onto the clothing. But they're both makabel tuma. Why are they makabel tuma? Because theoretically, you could walk around, a person could walk around with the bell as a jewelry. Could be jewelry, and therefore it would be susceptible to impurity. And now we have the animal. The animal can't go out with any of these. not the chotam shebetzavara, not on the ksuta, not the zug shebeksuta, not the zug shebetzavara. All those options, animal can't go out with them. And zeh v'zeh ein makablim tumah. None of them are susceptible to impurity, which makes sense, as we talked about before, that anything for animals is not considered really a utensil. So let's go in depth into this. Amar mar. Lo titzeh behema, lo b'chotam shebetzavara, v'lo b'chotam shebeksuta, v'lo b'zug shebetzavara, v'lo b'zug shebeksuta, v'zeh v'zeh ein makablim tumah. That's what we just repeated. The Gemara asked him, "V'zug behema ein makablim tumah." Wait, they're going to bring another braita now. The zug on the animal is not susceptible to impurity. That's what we just said. But Uriminu, that contradicts the following braita. Zug shel behema tme'ah v'shel delet tahora. What do we see here? Why is it not makabel tumah? Here it says in a braita that if you have a zug of a behema, it is susceptible to impurity. Okay, now we're going to talk about some other things. If it's a bell attached to a door, it's tahora. It's not susceptible to impurity. Again, we're going to get off on tangents of all sorts of things. Why not? A door is attached to the ground. And if you attach the bell to the door, well, it's considered connected to the door, and the door is attached to the ground, and anything attached to the ground is not susceptible to impurity. So therefore, if it's on a door, it's tahora. Shel delet. Now, what if you have, it was made for a door, va'asa'ol lebema, and you took it off, and you designated it for an animal, or behema, tme'ah. Then already, we learned this before, you can designate something for use in something that would make it susceptible to impurities, and just by designating it alone, even b'machshava, in your thoughts, that's enough to say now it will be susceptible to impurity. So if you take shel delet and you say, I'm using this for an animal, it already becomes susceptible to impurity. But the reverse doesn't work. Shel behema v'asa'ol ledelet. Okay, this is good because we keep reviewing things that we learned already. So in case you didn't get it the first or the second time, you'll get it again. If it's of an animal and then you decided to move the bell to the door, even though you attached it with nails and it's really stuck in the door now, it's still tameh, it's still susceptible to impurity. It doesn't change its status. Shekol kelim, here's a line we saw a few days ago. Yordin lidei tumatam b'machshava. It can become impure just by, if it wasn't impure before, but now you decide you're going to use it for something that would make it susceptible to impurities, it can become impure. But if you want, you take something that was already susceptible to impurity and you want to change its status to something not susceptible, you actually have to do something more serious to change it. And just attaching it to the door, it's still the same bell, it's going to still be susceptible to impurity. So therefore, by taking it from the animal to the door, it doesn't work. Okay, we're already distracted from our main point. What was our main point here? The bell on the animal is susceptible to impurity. And our braita that we quoted before said it's not. So how do we resolve this? Lo kashya, we're going to have two different types of bells. Ha di'it le'imbal, ha di'leit le'imbal. A bell has two parts. It has the part that's the outside part of the bell, and it has the part that's the inner part, the clapper that makes the noise. So now we're going to say, it depends whether the bell has a clapper. If it has a clapper, then it's susceptible to impurities. That's the source they were talking about. But if it doesn't have a clapper, then it's not. So the Gemara asks a few questions on this. The first question is manasha. Either way you look at it, I don't get it. Manahu, if we say this bell actually is a utensil, it shouldn't matter whether or not it has a clapper. And ilav manahu, and if it's not considered a utensil, then just by having a clapper, this turns it into a utensil. That seems a little bit odd. So the Gemara says, you shouldn't think that's odd. That actually makes perfect sense. Why? It is true that if it doesn't have a clapper, it's not a kli. But once you put the clapper in, it turns it into a kli. Why is that? Right now, why do they think it isn't? Because just because it makes noise doesn't necessarily mean it's a utensil. But they say, no, it actually does. Like he said, how do you know that if something is a metal utensil that makes a noise, it becomes impure? Shenamar, again, we're going to quote the verses where we learn all about purity and impurity in the Torah. Kol davar sheyavo ba'esh ta'aviru ba'esh. Okay, this doesn't exactly sound like it's talking about sounds, but what are they darshan here? Kol davar. Davar is often translated, right? Davar means item, but it's also from the same root as to speak, dibur. And even though this isn't dibur, this is a sound, like speech is a sound. Afilu dibur yavo ba'esh. even something that you use for sound, that also is considered a kli and needs purification. Okay, so now we basically say, okay, that's why we have clapper versus not with the clapper. If it has a clapper, it's a kli and it's makabel tuma. Our Braita, which was talking about it's not makabel tuma, it's not susceptible to impurity, must have been without a clapper. Well, now we're going to have a question on that from the earlier part of the Braita. Okay, if section number 3 of the Braita, when it brings up the issue of a bell, it means a bell without a clapper. Then in section number 2 of the Braita, when it talked about a bell, it must also mean bell without a clapper. And that's going to be a problem. Why? So now they say, B'mayu kimta, b'delately involved. So you're saying that Braita that we quoted, that we've been dealing with for a while now, is without a clapper. Ema mitziata, but look at the middle part of that Braita. The lo bezug shabbat savaro, we're now moving back to the slave. If the slave walks around with, right, he can't go out with a zug around its neck, aval yotzeu bezug shabbat suto, but he can go with one that's attached to the clothing, right, that's woven to the clothing. V'zeh mekablim tuma. And both of them are susceptible to impurity. Now we're stuck because ida lately involved mi mekabli tuma. If the bell around the neck of this slave doesn't have a clapper, then why would it be susceptible to impurity? We just distinguished and said, well, a bell with a clapper is susceptible, and without a clapper, it's not. By the way, I just want to point out, I forgot to mention, but why is the bell around the animal's neck with a clapper considered makabel tuma? Isn't it serving the animal? And the answer is no. If you remember, we talked about this before. It's serving the master, right? It's serving the owner of the animal, because the owner of the animal wants to know where his animal is, or maybe wants to sell it. It's serving human purposes, and that's why it's called a kli, but not actually serving the animal. So anyway, now we're going to say, ida lately involved mi makabel tuma. If it doesn't have the clapper, is it makabel tuma? And maybe even if you would think it is, well, we're going to bring a Braita to show it isn't. Uriminhu, another Braita. This, like I said, today we keep bringing other Braita that seem to contradict all the answers that we're bringing. How says zagim lemachteshet? We're now going to see all sorts of reasons why people put bells on items. Okay, if you make a bell for a millstone, and why would you do that? In the millstone, they would grind up spices. And it comes up in a bunch of places in the Gemara that they thought, and again, I know nothing about this, I'm sure there must be something to this, and I remember now some reasons we gave at some point, that the noise would actually make the spices come out better. Okay, it would add smell to it. I think there was something about maybe the air, the sound would create something. I'm not exactly sure, but they said it was good for the spices, and that's why the noise that it makes, they would put these bells on the millstone in order for it to be better while it's grinding up the spices. Ula arisa, this is for a baby, right? We all have mobiles on our babies, bassinets and stuff, right, or cribs. So for the crib of the baby, okay, that's a zagin. If you make a zag, this, by the way, is all going to be about susceptible to impurity or not, or at least susceptible to impurity or not. So if you make a bell for the millstone or for the baby, or the mitpachot sparim, this is interesting, on the Sifrei Torah, they would put bells, right? If you think about it in shul, when they walk around with the Torah, there's parts that clink sometimes on the Torah, right? When they take the Torah out of the Aron, it has the Eitzei Chayim on it. Sometimes they clink, they make noise. Everybody knows, right? If you're not paying attention, all of a sudden you'll hear the noise. You'll know they're taking out the Torah, and you'll stand up. So it's a way that people would know that the Torah was coming. Ula mitpachot tinokot, so that you won't lose your children. They would put bells on. So all those things, yesh lahem imbal tmeim, ein lahem imbal tehorim, right? If they have a clapper, then that's called a kli, and they're going to be susceptible to impurity. If they don't have a clapper, then they're not. So now we're back to our source where it said, for the slave, even if it doesn't have a clapper, right? We said remember, the animal is in a case where it doesn't have a clapper, which means that also the slave must be in a case where it doesn't have a clapper. And the line about the slave said, right? They're susceptible to impurity, this palmon. So how could that be that the bell is, but the other one isn't? So now we're going to say, and by the way, there's one last line of the Braita, which we're just going to read now. It's not really connected, but we'll deal with it soon. Nitlu in balehem adayin tumatam alehem. If you take out the clapper, it's still going to be a kli that's impure. Okay? So now, Hanimile, so how do we answer this? Bitino dilakala avidele, aval gadol tachshitule. when you're talking about a child, the whole reason that you have this bell around the child is for the noise. And all the other cases, it was important for the noise. But for a gadol, it's a tachshit. When the eved walks around with this bell, the bell serves a purpose because it makes noise, but it also can just be, like people have necklaces with charms on them. It could serve as jewelry. And since it has a purpose, even without the bell, only for the slave, not for all these other cases. The other cases, there's no point to a mobile if it's not going to make the noise. There's no point to, all these things without the noise. But for the eved, it does have a purpose without the noise, and that's why it's susceptible to impurity, and that's why it's different than all the other cases. Okay? Even if it doesn't have the clapper. Okay? See, someone wrote, isn't the clapper muksa on Shabbat? So first of all, it could be he's going out with the clapper without, they stopped up the clapper. We saw that in with the animal, that you could stop up the clapper so it wouldn't make noise, and then you still couldn't go out with it on Shabbat. So it could be they're referring to that. Okay, Amar. Now the last thing we have to deal with for today is that last line of the Braita. Okay, even though we're done with our topic, okay, we're done with all our contradictions that we had. We're finished. So again, we basically say, if you want to just start from the last section we did, we basically brought in this Braita. This is actually much earlier in the Daf. The Braita had 3 sections, and then each section we kind of seem to have some contradiction from some of the source, and then we resolved it by talking about, it's only in this case. Except it's in this case, well, that doesn't make sense with the earlier part of the Braita, and then they explain that also. Okay, now we're going to try to understand this last one. And now we're just totally off because we're only talking about impurity here. Nitzlu im balehem adayin tumatam alehem. Okay, Amar, right? We're quoting, going back to something quoted before. In all these cases with the millstone and the Sefer Torah and the child and the mobile and the clothing, all those things, once you take out if it has a clapper, it's susceptible to impurity. If it doesn't have a clapper, it's not. But if you take out the clapper, in other words, it was susceptible to impurity, the clapper comes out, it's still tumatan alehem. It's still susceptible to impurity. So now they say, lemay chazu. What can you use this for if it doesn't have a clapper, right? What did we say? The whole idea was it's for the noise. And if the whole idea is for the noise and it has no clapper, it can't make noise, then why would we still call this a kli? It seems it's a shinoi maaseh. There's something that happened to it. It's different than it was before. It should not be susceptible to impurity anymore. So we're going to have 2 answers. The first is a bias, then we're going to have a long question where Rav is going to basically say, it makes no sense what you're saying, and Rav is going to give his own answer, and with that, we'll finish the daf. Amar Bai, ho'il shehayot yechol lachziro. It's something that very easily goes in and out. It's not like you need someone special to put it back in. You just stick it right back in. So even though it's not in right now, it's as if it's in when it comes to impurity because it can so easily be put back in. Sounds reasonable. However, Rav is going to disprove it from something we already learned. Again, what's fun about Gemara is things constantly repeat themselves. If you don't get them the first time and then you see them over and over, you get them. So now, how I so? Mativ Rava. Rava now questions and says, wait. It says in the Mishnah, this is a Mishnah in Para, it says, Hazug v'ha'imbal chibur. These 2 things are considered mechubarim, the clapper and the bell part, right, the outer part, are considered connected. Now, what does it mean they're considered connected? We learned this already a few times. If the bell, right, let's say a sheretz falls on the outer part, well, then the part that's inside is considered also tameh because they're considered one and the same. If you sprinkle the paraduma waters, let's say they became susceptible to impurity of a dead person, and you sprinkle the impure waters on part of it, then the other part, even if you didn't sprinkle the waters on, is already pure. That's how it works. They're considered one item. Now, if you want to say, that even when they're not connected, they're still considered connected, and that's basically what the Braita seem to say. Even though you take out the imbal, it's still, right, this all is considered one, even when they're not connected. And maybe hazug b'ha'imbal chibur. Hazug b'ha'imbal chibur sounds like when they're attached, not when they're detached. And if you want to say maybe even when they're detached, you can't possibly say that, because look at the following source. V'hatanya, misporat shel prakim, the izmal shel rehitni. This is those scissors that were made up of 2 parts that they would sometimes keep together and sometimes separate. Or the izmal shel rehitni, the blade of a carpenter's plane, which again there was a blade that sat in a wooden piece, those things are considered, what did we say? They're chibur l'tuma ve'ein chibur lahaza'ah. They're attached for tum and tara purposes, but they're not, meaning if one became impure, the other would also, the other side of it, but not when it comes to sprinkling the parajuma waters. V'amrina manafshach, but they ask the question, why? In other words, it should be the same in both. It should be either, if it's chibur, then it's chibur even for haza'ah, and if it's not chibur, then it shouldn't even be chibur for tuma. So how did we answer that question? Amarabba, dvar toha b'shat malacha chibur bein l'tuma bein haza'ah. From Torah law, while you're using it, it's definitely chibur for both. And shelo b'shat malacha, and if you're not using it, now what does it mean if you're not using it? You're not using it, here comes the important part, but they're obviously still attached, right? Then it's eino chibur lo l'tuma v'lo lahaza'ah. Now, if it's when you're not using it, it's not considered chibur for tuma, then for sure when they're detached, they wouldn't be considered chibur. Okay, so that's already the answer to that's basically Rabba's question. Certainly can't be considered chibur. But anyway, let's just keep reading. Because, so why do we have this split between haza'ah, no, but tuma, yes? So what they're saying is gazru al tuma b'shalo b'shat malacha mishum tuma shi b'shat malacha. What did they say? Since tuma, when you are using these scissors, one part of it will affect the other. Therefore, when you're not using them, we're going to say it also is matame. But when it comes to haza'ah, which is actually making the law easier for us, shi b'shat malacha mishum haza'ah shalo b'shat malacha. They said, since it doesn't work, the haza'ah, when you're not using them, then we're not going to allow it when you are using them, just so that you don't confuse them and think the haza'ah works when you're not using them. But in any case, however you look at this, they're obviously talking about when they're still attached. But once you detach them, nobody thinks that they're connected. So how could you possibly say, Abaye, that just because you can easily connect these, that means they're all connected? It's not possible. So again, we're going to have to explain this line about nitzlu in balehem adayin tumatam alehem. Why is it still considered that it's tameh once you detach the clapper? So Ela Amarava ho'il v'ro'il ha'kisho gabe cheres. He doesn't talk about the fact that the clapper can go right back in. He says, no. What's the point of the pa'amon? The pa'amon is to make sound, right? That's why. But what does he say? Well, you can make sound with the outer part also. You could, if the Eved wants, the servant wants to make noise with this, he can knock it against a kli cheres, against an earthenware vessel, and it'll make noise. It's still a utensil that could theoretically make noise even without the clapper. And that's why he says it's not, you need a shinoi maaseh to get it to change. That's not enough of a shinoi maaseh. And Rashi goes into a whole thing. Those who remember this, it's very famous. If you have a bowl that gets a hole in it, so theoretically, it shouldn't be makabel tumah anymore because it's not usable. But the question is, how big a hole? And they say it has to be a hole the size that you couldn't fit a pomegranate in. Okay, which means it has to be a very big hole, even if it has a small hole. And let's say apricots would fall through. But if a pomegranate won't fall through, even though you can't use it for everything you could have used it for before, you could still use it to hold pomegranate, so it's still considered a kli, and it hasn't lost its susceptibility to impurity. So likewise here, even though you can't use it in the same way, you still could perform the same action. You can have it make noise, just in a different manner. And that's why it still remains susceptible to impurity, even once the clapper is out. Okay, so that was an aside. And anyway, we're going to see tomorrow a little bit more about this and about other possible uses of this, the outer part of the bell, other possible uses besides that one. Okay, that's it for today.